Laura, thank you indeed. And again, if people have comments or queries or questions, feel free to drop them into the chat. But for the minute, I'm going to move on to introduce to you Berta Quininero. And Berta works with she's the Network Communications Officer working with INAR, who are the Irish Network Against Racism. And I had the most lovely meeting bumping into all of these groups who are part of this network earlier this month as we got the chance to advertise this event. And we look forward again to meeting some of these people next week. But what I really took away from the meeting was that despite some of the difficulties we're learning about, there is huge hope, which is exactly how Lara finished her piece. She finished on that real note of hope and that talking about that space of love. And I found it there in Einar. So Berta, if you don't mind, I will hand over to you if that's okay. I have your picture here, so you tell me whenever you'd like me to share that.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Brian, for inviting me. Unfortunately, I do not have a presentation, so it's just going to be me talking. But as Brian said, I did put together a picture that's going to help clarify something that I'll be talking about in a few minutes. So as Brian was saying, my name is Berta Quininero, and I'm the Network and Communications Officer at the Irish Network Against Racism. And throughout the minutes that I'll be speaking, I'm going to take you through the work that we do, how racism manifests in Ireland, and how our work addresses that. I'm not going to talk about the rise of the far right. That wouldn't be my area of expertise. But yeah, so what is INAR? So the Irish Network Against Racism is a collective of organisations and community groups, as Brian just mentioned there, and we work together to address racism and promote human rights in Ireland. We work through research, community development and networking with the aim of creating a strong voice to advocate for racial equality. So a key part of my role is to link with the grassroots organisations and the wider community together so that we can build a unified front to properly and advocate in an informed way for racial equality in Ireland, lobby and influence policymaking. Our work is centred on the idea that awareness is key, together with the many community groups and organisations that we work with, a lot of which are doing work on the ground or supporting the communities that are affected by racism, or working themselves as people with lived experience. And we focus on spreading awareness about the power relations that are ingrained in our communities, and empower people to take action. Now, these are big words, but hopefully, as I take you through the short presentation, these will become clearer. It's important that I highlight the power relations because like often we see racism as something that affects minority ethnic groups, certain communities, people on the move, as Lara was took us through there. But we do not see racism as a concept that actually involves us all. But in fact, we're all part of a system that has been created to favor some and disempower others. And this is how societies are sustained. So it is our role and responsibility to talk about the importance of being active anti-racists, which means that whether we like it or not, some of us have certain benefits. We benefit from certain aspects of this system that we're all part of in our society. And it is our collective duty to use this privilege to challenge the systems, the institutions that need to change so that people have equal access to all aspects of life. So racism in Ireland, and how does it manifest? Racism in Ireland, like in many countries, is not just about the overt acts of hate or violence. It's structural or systemic. It's institutional, and it's individual as well. Obviously, these overt acts of hate and microaggressions. Sorry. So, racism in Ireland is rooted in power relations, as I was saying, and has deep historical contexts that go back to the times of conquest, domination, and dehumanization. Racism is not just a matter of individuals holding prejudiced views about specific communities, but it's deeply embedded in our societal systems. And in Ireland, we see racism in many forms. These include anti-Black racism, anti-traveller racism, anti-Roma racism, anti-Muslim racism or Islamophobia. We see anti-migrant racism or xenophobia, anti-Semitism. And it's also very important to note that racism also intersects with other social issues, such as gender inequality, class issues, the marginalization of LGBTQ plus and disabled people. So just to go into the types of racism, and hopefully I'm going to break those down for you and to fully understand how racism manifests. I'll briefly define the different forms. So structural racism refers to the way society is organized to exclude ethnic minority groups from equal opportunities. It's about how laws, cultural norms, and societal practices disproportionately affect the outcomes of these groups. For instance, life expectancy for male travelers in Ireland is up to 15 years shorter than the general population, which is huge. And also the fact that a few years ago, out of one of our reports, we collected that 16% of African people living in Ireland were unemployed, compared to just 4% of people from Western European countries. Now, the annual reports that we gather always show disparities in this kind of fashion. This is just one example. And these are clear signs of structural inequality. Then on institutional racism, on the other hand, it refers to discriminatory practices within institutions, whether they are intentional or unintentional, but which ultimately result in unequal outcomes for ethnic minority groups. So this can be seen in areas like policing, education, healthcare, and employment. So when institutions fail to implement policies that prevent discrimination or fail to address unconscious bias, which is favoring a community over another, they perpetuate racism. An example of that is the rates of stop and search practices among policing. There's a lot of racial profiling. So people that look a certain way might be mistakenly or might be targeted, or they might be they might be targeted for random stop and search practices. And for instance, Black African communities are disproportionately affected under these practices in Ireland. And then we have individual racism, which refers to the personal and direct forms of discrimination, such as racial slurs, graffiti, bullying, all these microaggressions, which are just small and often subtle incidents that, when accumulated, can have a huge negative impact on individuals. And that's something that we call the ripple effect. And it has a really deep impact on whole societies. So now, if Brian, you could just share the picture that I sent you earlier, that'd be great. Because I think it really shows, or it's a very visual way of seeing how the different types of racism and the different layers. Because we can think of racism as an iceberg. So the tip, the visible part, represents incidents of individual racism that we can see and report, like hate crimes or racist comments. These are visible and they're often recognized. You can hear it on the Lewis and quickly identify, okay, this is wrong. However, the much larger part of the iceberg, which is in the hidden base, the structural and institutional racism, is much harder to see, but it affects every aspect of our society. These deeply ingrained systems expose people of color mostly to greater conditions for oppression, and impose a lot of obstacles that prevent equal opportunity. racism manifests at various levels, and when it becomes ingrained in these systems and institutions that I keep mentioning, it evolves into these types of racism that we see on the base. So yeah, thank you, Brian. Yeah, so the following, I'm just going to go over a few examples of these types of racism that illustrate how these systems disproportionately affect the different groups. So, for instance, under Black racism, um, um, Black individuals might often experience racial profiling by law enforcement, like I mentioned, such as the Gardaí, and they face overt discrimination in employment and housing. Our annual reports keep collecting this evidence. For example, studies have shown that job applicants with African sounding names are less likely to be invited, say, for interviews than those with Irish sounding names, even when their qualifications are identical, which is key, really, and really kind of makes the concepts that I just went over like really really visual. And then, members of the traveler community frequently face discrimination when they're seeking accommodation. Many people from the traveling community are denied rental properties based on their ethnicity. And something that shows that the different impacts of all the different types of racism. Say, for instance, we have a young child from the traveling community. He's in school and he's getting bullied. That is going to affect his performance in school. So that little boy might his mental health is going to be impacted by these effects, by the effects of those bullying practices. Or the harassment, and then maybe he's not going to do well in school, so that will impact his future in finding employment in the future if that kid struggles to graduate, and then we just see that as being part of that ripple effect that I talked about earlier, and how that impacts the communities in a really deep level. Yeah, and then a very clear example as well under the anti-migrant racism or xenophobia is the direct provision system, because it exemplifies both institutional and structural racism. Direct provision is an institution, but that is reinforced by these governmental practices that are based on racial inequality, really. And at this point, it's important as well to mention intersectionality, which refers to how overlapping identities such as race, gender, disability, sexual orientation, or class interact to create unique experiences of discrimination and disadvantage. So, say the experience of a Black single mother in direct provision who maybe is Muslim and wears a hijab is going, so this woman is we see many layers intersecting in there, different categories of oppression that put her at a greater disadvantage than say a woman who lives in their provision but maybe does not is not standing across so many intersections, and it's important to bear that in mind. Okay, so how do we tackle racism as INAR? So we don't just talk about it, we act. So our work includes advocating for anti-racism laws, combating hate speech at also a European and level, and we support communities that are mostly affected by racism. We work in solidarity with these communities, and working in solidarity is one of the most important aspects that we are always putting an emphasis on, collaborating with organizations, as I said, across Europe to push for meaningful policy change that will tackle racism at every level of this iceberg. Perfect. This includes our anti-racism campaigns, as well, and our training programs like Salam or Stand, and we have information about them on our website. But essentially, there's a group of trainers who have lived experience, and they deliver training to other organizations about racism, but they talk from personal experience. And yeah, we provide tools for civil society groups to support their communities effectively, and we work closely with those impacted by racism to ensure that their voices are heard in the conversation about change. And finally, I think it's important that I share a little bit about the iReport system that we have. It's one of our most important tools and it's a confidential, independent platform where people can report incidents of racism. Whether you've experienced racism, witnessed it, or heard about it in your community, you can easily report incidents online. And what this does is it helps us track patterns in racist behavior, spot trends, and work towards localized responses to racism that we can then use to inform research and policy. And yeah, just to conclude, our work is not just about recognizing the issues of racism, but also about creating solutions and about empowering communities, challenging systems, and promoting equality through that collaboration that I was talking about. So together, really, we can build a society that's based on hope and not fear, hopefully, where everybody, regardless of their background, can live without the fear of discrimination that is now permeating our society. Thank you.
Thank you indeed, Berta. That's a whistle-stop tour of what INAR are do and what they're about. And you gave us a great description following on from Lara's piece about what is racism in Ireland and all its manifestations. And the picture of the iceberg really explains a lot. But there were a couple of key things that I took away from that. One, that awareness is key, and that without all that awareness, we don't know enough to be able to make informed decisions. Also, you spoke about speaking to those with the lived experience of racism, and that from them you're learning all of the time, and that we have a responsibility, and that we have a responsibility also to be active anti-racists. I was interested very much too in the institutional racism that you mentioned around the Gardaí and the police, and also in schools. And in one way, that actually links us very nicely with the work of the Cork Migrant Centre. I had the privilege of working with Sister Jo McCarthy a number of years ago when she prepared a paper from the Cork Migrant Centre on the issue of racism in schools and how it's manifesting itself in schools. And it is often kind of an unconscious bias, and that children are experiencing things. And Joe and the Cork Migrant Centre were trying to bring this issue forward and presented a paper to the Convention of the Rights of the Child and attended in Geneva to see their work through a number of years ago. So that's what you have mentioned there. There's a concrete example that is following on with the Cork Migrant Centre. And Sister Joe is here with us this evening. But on behalf of the Cork Migrant Centre, I'd like to welcome Naomi Machete, who is the programme coordinator with the Cork Migrant Centre. So without further ado, I'll thank you, Berta. And again, I will say to people, if they want to put questions into the chat, feel free to do so. I see, I think Anne Kelleher from Anat has put a question in around speaking in schools. And I know from having been at the INR meeting that there are a number of people who attend there who do speak to schools and are open to invitation to attend schools, speaking specifically to young people on the issues that Berta has raised. So thanks, Anne, indeed, for that question. Naomi, if it's okay with you, I'm going to hand over to you, and thank you indeed for attending with us this evening. We're looking forward to hearing from you and a little bit more about the Cork Migrant Centre and what you do there. So I'll hand over to you. Thanks again, Naomi. You have the floor.